You never realize just how much a year tried to teach you until you finally slow down enough to hear it actually speak to you. This year asked more of me than I expected. It pushed, it clarified, and it revealed. And the lessons that it taught, they're the ones that I want to share with you here today on the Everyday Diplomat. Hi, and welcome to the Everyday Diplomat. I'm Michael Forrest, a retired Marine Sergeant Major, former U.S. diplomat, and somebody who spent the better part of 20 years leading high-performing teams through crisis, conflict, and constant change. As this year came to a close, I found myself reflecting on moments that really shaped me the most. The lessons that surfaced, they weren't loud, they were really quiet, they were steady, and they were impossible to ignore. Let's go ahead and start with the first one. In 2025, intentionality became the first and the most important lesson of my entire year. And it didn't surface in a quiet or even in a comfortable way. It showed up in the middle of the most major life transition I've had in the better part of 2 decades. You see, after more than 20 years of service as a United States Marine, I stepped into a chapter of my life that felt both familiar and yet completely foreign. Retirement brought a sudden pause that I hadn't felt in decades, and with that pause came the realization that I needed to rethink how I was living. You see, for the last 2 decades, my life was directed almost entirely in service to others. I am deeply grateful for all of that time. Getting to serve this nation, mentoring Marines, and carrying responsibilities that shaped me into the leader that I am today is one of the greatest honors of my entire life. But the truth is that my family, my health, and my own personal direction often took a backseat to the mission. The work always came first. In fact, the Marines, they always came first. And in many ways, that was the only way for me to do the job well. But this new season is completely different. It's the first time in my adult life where the story is not being written for me. I get to write it. I get to choose what I say yes to. I get to choose where my time goes. I get to choose the relationships that I cultivate and the ones that I get to release. And that realization forced me to become a far more intentional person than I had been in the years and the decades prior. I began to ask myself questions that I had ignored over the years. What do I want the next decade or two of my life to look like? Where do I want my energy to go? Who do I want to become outside of the uniform? The answer shaped every decision that I made this year. Every meaningful step required purpose, not momentum. And the more intentional that I became, the more clarity I found in how I wanted to lead, how I wanted to serve, and then how I wanted to show up for the people that I care about the most. If you find that you're entering your own period of transition or growth, stay with me for next week's episode where we begin to set leadership goals for 2026. It's the next natural step in walking into a new season with absolute purpose. Take a moment to go ahead and like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. Now, let's move into the second lesson because this year taught me that clarity matters just as much as intention. You know, once intentionality took root, something else entirely happened. I began to see how powerful clarity really is. Having clarity in what you want, who you want to be, and where you want your life to go changes the entire way that you move. It makes decisions easier, it removes the clutter, the noise, it turns pressure into decision. I was very fortunate in many ways. The last 2 decades of my life, it created a foundation of stability for my family and I. The rhythm, discipline, and the structure of the Marine Corps, it gave us the margins to make thoughtful choices instead of rushed ones. When I finally stepped back and began to reflect on the chapter that I was closing, I realized how rare and valuable that space truly was. You see, with intentionality came a lot of clarity. For the first time in a very long time, I was able to ask myself what type of work I wanted to do next, not based on obligation or orders, but on purpose. I spent time looking at my strengths, my experiences, the type of environments where I thrive, and the type of impact that I still want to make. And because I had done the groundwork earlier in my career, I didn't need to sprint into the next opportunity. I could choose, I could actually be patient, and I could look for a role that aligned not just with my skill set, but with the values and the kind of leader that I want to be moving forward. But clarity this year went far beyond my own career decisions. It showed up in countless places. It showed up in conversations with my children about how they want to grow. It showed up in the way that Nellie and I talked about our goals and the life that we want to build together. It showed up in how I approached my own personal development, my health, my relationships, and my work here with the Everyday Diplomat. Clarity protects you from drifting. It keeps you from saying yes to things that really just drain the life out of you. It helps you recognize what's aligned and what is simply just noise. And the more clarity that you have, the more confidently you begin to move through the uncertainty that life brings. Leaders don't need every single answer, but they do need a very clear direction. When you know what matters the most, speed becomes optional, but purpose becomes the guide. Amongst the craziness and all the change, adaptability became one of the clearest lessons of my entire year, and it showed up in ways that I really just couldn't ignore. I didn't want this episode to become a story about my retirement, but when it comes to adaptability, there's nothing in recent memory that tested me more than stepping out of the Marine Corps after more than 20 years of service. It's a really long time. Becoming a Marine is not just a job. It actually completely rewires you from the inside out. It changes your internal hardwire in a way that stays with you, I believe, for the rest of your life. The culture is incredibly intense. It's disciplined, direct, and incredibly precise. We communicate differently than the average person. We think differently. We move differently. We operate at a pace that often feels completely foreign to anybody who has not actually lived it. The jargon, the tone, the clarity of our roles, the absolute commitment to the standards that we set, even the speed at which we get to the point. All of it becomes absolute second nature. Leaving that environment after 20 plus years, it requires a level of adaptability that no handbook or textbook could ever prepare you for. You move from a world where structure is absolutely ingrained into every single moment of every day, into a world where structure looks completely different. You see, the civilian workplace values many of the traits that Marines excel in, but it expresses it in ways that require completely relearning the way that we've done things in the past. What was normal for 2 decades suddenly becomes a reference point instead of the rule book. And guess what? That's where adaptability becomes incredibly essential. It's not about discarding what made you successful, but it's about reshaping it. You see, translating it is important, and learning the culture of your new environment, the same way that you once mastered the culture of the Marine Corps. It's remembering the strengths that you carry with you while also being humble enough to learn the norms, the expectations, and the language of this new chapter that you just entered. This year reminded me that resilience is not just about pushing through the hard, difficult moments. It's about evolving. It's about recognizing when the tools that once served you in a different world need to now be resharpened or maybe softened or reshaped to serve you well in this new chapter. It's about stepping into this new unfamiliar space with a willingness to learn rather than relying on what you've always known to be true. And if you're stepping into a new leadership role or navigating a transition of your own, this truth matters even more. You see, the first 30 days of any new chapter, they set the tone for everything else that follows. That was the mindset behind creating my course, The First 30 Days. It gives leaders the structure and the clarity that they need to start strong instead of guessing their way through the most critical window of any new role. You see, adaptability is not about losing who you are. It's about becoming who the moment requires you to be. Let's go ahead and move to the 4th lesson, because this year also reminded me of the type of leadership that builds trust deeper and faster than anything else. 2025 taught me another lesson that became undeniable, and it is the power of servant leadership. The desire to serve other people, it doesn't end when you take off the uniform. And I'll tell you what, in many ways, it becomes even clearer. You see, years ago, long before I retired, I put on a different uniform when I joined my local fire department as a volunteer. Service never stopped being a way of life. It simply changed forms for me. Maybe that was my way of building in continuity. But as I stepped into the corporate world, I learned something very important. Servant leadership is just as relevant here as it ever was in the Marine Corps or the fire service. Every organization has its own tribe, its own group of people who rely on you for more than you ever realize. They look to you for guidance, for steadiness, for support, and for that type of leadership that helps them grow rather than just helps them perform. You see, this year reminded me that leadership, it's not just about being in charge. It's about caring for the people who trust you enough to actually follow your direction. It's about being willing to pour into other people, even when that effort goes completely unseen. It's about recognizing the experiences that you've been given and then choosing to use them in a way that strengthens the people around you, maybe to your own detriment. I've been blessed to live through these moments, through challenges and environments that shaped me in many ways that most people will never get to experience. The perspectives that I've learned, they're a responsibility. It means that I have something worth sharing, something worth teaching, something that's worth passing on. And to step into an organization where I can offer those lessons in a relevant and meaningful way, it's given this chapter of my career a depth of purpose that I never expected. And there's another part to all of this. The people that we serve, they matter to me on a very personal level. The customers, the community, the men and women who rely on the products that we provide, these are the people that I respect deeply. People whose mission I understand in and out. And they're people who stood beside in one form or another for most of my career. Being able to serve them in a new capacity, it doesn't take me away from who I was, but it does expand who I'm going to become. Servant leadership builds trust because it's rooted in something that's far bigger than position. It's rooted in heart, in intention and humility, and the willingness for us to honor the people who depend on you the most. And this year, it made that more real than it ever has. You see, all of these lessons, they pointed me towards one final truth, and it became the most meaningful one of the year. Stay tuned because it's coming right after this. The final lesson of this year that I want to share is one that reached deeper than I ever expected. Legacy. It's not the polished version that people post about. It's the real version, the type that takes decades to build and only reveals itself when you slow down long enough to see what has actually lasted. This year marked the end of more than 20 years in the Marine Corps for me. It's a chapter that shaped almost every single part of who I am today. And while retiring itself was incredibly meaningful, the moment that truly clarified and certified legacy for me, it came a little bit later when I received the honor of a lifetime when I was invited back to Japan to speak at the 250th Marine Corps birthday ball for VMGR 152, the Sumos, greatest squadron out there. To stand before those Marines in the same unit where I once served was perhaps the greatest honor of my entire career. What made it absolutely life-changing, it wasn't the speech. It was getting to see Marines that I had the privilege to serve alongside more than a decade ago, who were now the ones leading the organization. These were men and women who once were junior in rank are now standing as the standard bearers of a legacy that we helped build together more than a decade earlier. Getting to watch that come full circle in real time was something that I'm never going to forget. That's when it hit me. Legacy is not what you say, it's who you shape. And now in this new chapter, legacy is looking a little bit different. It's no longer anchored in deployments and inspections or the billets that we hold. It's anchored in my family, my children, the time that I choose to give them. A lot. The example that I set for them. It's anchored in the way that I choose to show up in my new role and the way that I support the people that I now have the privilege to serve alongside now. And it's the way that I carry forward the lessons of the last 2 decades into a world that doesn't operate by the same rules, but still deserves the same level of care. You see, legacy is built in those really quiet moments. It's that quiet ride to school with your children, the late night conversations with your spouse, the small decisions at work that perhaps nobody sees, but everybody feels. The humility in which you treat other people, the steadiness that you bring into the room every day, and the influence that you impart without ever needing to receive credit for. This year reminds me that legacy is not a finish line. It's a rhythm. It's a pattern of many choices that, over time, they reveal the truth of who you really are. And if you want to build a legacy that grows far beyond your title or your career, you have to stay connected to the lessons that life is trying to teach you. That's why I built the Diplomat's Dispatch. It's where I share the deeper reflections, the stories that don't always make it into these videos, and the lessons that continue to shape the way that I lead today. If you want to walk that journey with me, you can join through the link on the QR code that you'll see somewhere here on the screen. I never know where that darn thing is going to go. But hey, legacy is not created in the spotlight. It's created in the everyday moments that most people tend to overlook. And that leads me into the final reflection that I want to leave you with as we step into the next year. Hang on for just a moment. All right, as we bring this year to a close, I want to leave you with a thought that has carried me through every season of my entire life. Growth does not happen by accident. It happens because you chose to pay attention. It happens because you decide to stop drifting and start leading with absolute intention. It happens because you're willing to look back with honesty, to carry forward what matters, and then to release all the other things that don't. This year pushed, it clarified, and it reshaped me in ways that I never expected. And maybe you felt some of that too. Maybe this was a year that asked more of you than you thought you had to give. Maybe it was a year of transition or rebuilding or rediscovering who you are. So if that's true, I hope something in these lessons helps you step into the next chapter of your life with a lot more confidence, with more clarity and more defined purpose. You deserve to walk into 2026 with direction, not with drift. With intention, not with any pressure, and with a sense of who you're becoming and not just what you're doing. And I look forward to walking that journey right alongside you, one lesson at a time. Thank you very kindly for watching, and thank you for spending your time with us here. I'm Michael Forrest, and this is the Everyday Diplomat.